7 in the morning, February 1942. A precision machine shop on the east side of Detroit contracted to produce crankshafts for the Wright 1820 Cyclone aircraft engine. The temperature on the floor is a comfortable 68 degrees, kept constant because precision machining demands thermal stability. A machinist named Walter Brzezinski, second-generation Polish-American, 41 years old, stands at a cylindrical grinding machine, finishing the main bearing journals of a forged steel crankshaft. The grinding wheel spinning in front of him is turning at 3,500 revolutions per minute. Its working surface is not made of ordinary abrasive. It is made of, or rather dressed with, industrial diamond. And the small diamond-tipped tool Brzezinski uses to true that wheel, to keep its cutting surface perfectly round and perfectly sharp, is the single most irreplaceable object in the entire shop. Without the diamond, the grinding wheel cannot be dressed. Without dressing, the wheel loses its precision within hours of use. Without precision grinding, the crankshaft journals cannot be finished to the 2/10,000ths of an inch tolerance that the Wright Cyclone requires. Without finished crankshafts, there are no aircraft engines. Without aircraft engines, there are no aircraft. The entire towering edifice of American aircraft production, the plants at Willow Run and Wichita and Burbank and Seattle, the hundreds of thousands of aircraft that America will build during the war, rests at its foundation on a supply of small industrial-grade diamonds that the United States does not produce, has never produced, and cannot produce, because there are no diamond mines anywhere in North America capable of supplying them. Walter Brzezinski does not think about this as he dresses his grinding wheel that February morning. The diamond is in the tool room crib, issued to him by the tool clerk, logged in and logged out, treated as a consumable like any other. He has no idea that the supply of those diamonds is, at that exact moment, the subject of an increasingly desperate struggle between the United States government and a foreign cartel that controls almost the entire world's diamond production and that has, for reasons of its own commercial strategy, declined to do the one thing the United States most urgently needs it to do. The diamond is, to most people, a gemstone. It is the thing in an engagement ring. It is a symbol of wealth, of romance, of permanence. This conception of the diamond, as it happens, was largely manufactured by the same cartel that is central to this story, through one of the most successful advertising campaigns in commercial history. But the gemstone is not what mattered to the war. What mattered to the war was the other diamond, the industrial diamond. The small, flawed, off-color, commercially worthless as jewelry diamond that constitutes roughly 3/4 of all the diamonds dug out of the ground anywhere on Earth. The industrial diamond mattered because diamond is the hardest substance known to exist. On the Mohs scale of mineral hardness, which runs from 1 to 10, diamond is a 10, and the gap between diamond and the next hardest natural materials is enormous. This hardness makes diamond the only material that can efficiently cut, grind, shape, and finish the hardened steels and tungsten carbides from which modern precision machinery is built. A diamond-dressed grinding wheel can hold its shape and its cutting precision through operations that would destroy any other abrasive within minutes. A diamond die can draw metal wire to a uniform diameter held to millionths of an inch, because the diamond orifice does not wear out. A diamond-tipped tool can true the surface of a grinding wheel, machine a hardened bearing race, or test the hardness of an alloy in ways that no substitute material can match. Of the world's annual diamond production of approximately 2.5 tons in the early 1940s, 75% went to industry, and more than half of that industrial production was consumed by the United States. The country that built more machinery than the rest of the world combined consumed more industrial diamonds than the rest of the world combined, and it produced none of them. This is the paradox at the center of the story. The United States in 1942 was the most powerful industrial nation on Earth. It was building a war machine of unprecedented scale. Its factories were producing aircraft, tanks, ships, guns and ammunition in quantities that would eventually overwhelm every enemy. And every single one of those factories, at the deepest level of its operation, depended on a supply of small industrial diamonds that came entirely from foreign sources, that was controlled almost entirely by a single cartel headquartered in South Africa and London, and that the United States had no domestic ability to replace. The most powerful industrial economy in human history rested on a foundation of imported diamonds, and the cartel that controlled those diamonds understood this perfectly and used its understanding to extract maximum commercial advantage from a nation fighting for its survival. The cartel was De Beers. The story of how De Beers managed the world's diamond supply during the Second World War, of how it declined to build the strategic stockpile in the United States that American war planners desperately wanted, of how it allegedly manipulated prices and quality during the war years, and of how the United States Department of Justice eventually filed an antitrust lawsuit against it in 1945, is one of the strangest and least told stories of the American war effort. It is a story about how a commercial monopoly came into direct conflict with the needs of a nation at war, and about how that nation, the most powerful on earth, found itself unable to compel a foreign cartel to do what it wanted, because the cartel held a resource that the nation could not produce and could not do without. The popular history of the American war effort celebrates the abundance. It tells the story of a nation that outproduced the world, that buried its enemies under an avalanche of materiel, that turned its vast industrial capacity to the production of war and overwhelmed the Axis through sheer volume. This story is largely true, but it omits the choke points, the specific materials and inputs where American abundance ran into the hard wall of geological reality. America had no natural rubber. America had no tin. America had inadequate domestic supplies of tungsten, of chromium, of manganese, of a dozen other strategic materials. And America had no industrial diamonds at all. These choke points were where the war was nearly lost, in the unglamorous realm of strategic materials procurement, far from any battlefield, in the offices of the War Production Board and the Strategic Materials Division, and the various procurement agencies that spent the war scrambling to secure the inputs without which the famous abundance could not exist. The men who fought this part of the war were not soldiers. They were government procurement officers, industrial chemists, geologists, and economists. They were not famous then or now. Their battles were fought in negotiations, in stockpile inventories, in shipping manifests, in legal filings. The industrial diamond crisis of 1942 was one of their battles, and it was one of the more difficult ones, because the enemy in this case was not a foreign government that could be bombed or blockaded or defeated in the field. The enemy was a commercial cartel that controlled a resource America needed, that operated entirely outside American legal jurisdiction, and that had every commercial incentive to maintain its control rather than surrender it to the convenience of a wartime ally. To understand why industrial diamonds were so critical, you have to understand how precision machinery is actually made. Every machine tool, every lathe, every milling machine, every grinder used in the production of war material depends on cutting tools and abrasives that are harder than the materials they are working. As the war demanded harder and harder materials, hardened alloy steels for gun barrels and crankshafts, tungsten carbide for armor-piercing projectile cores and cutting tools, the materials being worked approached the hardness limits of conventional abrasives. Above a certain hardness, only diamond could do the work. The applications were everywhere. Grinding wheels used to finish precision parts had to be dressed, that is, trued and resharpened, continuously during use, and only a diamond dressing tool could do this. The grinding wheels themselves, in the most demanding applications, incorporated diamond grit bonded into their working surfaces. Wire drawing dies, which pulled metal wire through progressively smaller orifices to produce uniform diameter wire for everything from aircraft control cables to electrical wiring to the fine wire used in radio equipment, used diamond dies because only diamond could maintain a constant orifice diameter through the production of millions of feet of wire. Diamond tools trued the surfaces of bearing races. Diamond points tested the hardness of finished alloys. Diamond-tipped tools machined the hardened components of other machine tools. The diamond was not a single critical input. It was a critical input at hundreds of points throughout the entire machine tool economy, and the machine tool economy was the foundation on which all other war production rested. A propeller shaft for an aircraft engine, one of 17,000 parts in an air-cooled radio, could not be ground to its final dimensions without diamond. Multiply that single part by the millions of precision components in the American war economy, and the scale of the diamond dependency becomes clear. De Beers Consolidated Mines had been founded in 1888 by Cecil Rhodes, the British imperialist and mining magnate, through the consolidation of diamond mining operations in Kimberley, South Africa. From the beginning, the central insight of De Beers was that diamonds were valuable only so long as they were scarce, and that their scarcity could be artificially maintained by controlling the supply. Diamonds are not, in fact, rare in any absolute geological sense. Substantial deposits exist in South Africa, in the Belgian Congo, in Angola, in Sierra Leone, in what was then German Southwest Africa, and in numerous other locations. If all of these deposits had been mined and sold freely, the price of diamonds would have collapsed to a level reflecting their true abundance. De Beers existed to prevent this. It bought up mining operations, signed exclusive marketing agreements with producers it did not own, and channeled the world's diamond production through a single marketing organization, the Central Selling Organization, based in London. By the 1930s, this combine controlled the distribution of approximately 90 to 95% of the world's diamonds. The man who built the modern De Beers cartel was Ernest Oppenheimer, a German-born financier who had immigrated to South Africa and risen through the diamond and gold mining industries to take control of De Beers in the late 1920s. Oppenheimer was a brilliant and ruthless businessman who understood the diamond market better than anyone alive. He understood that the entire value of the diamond business rested on maintaining the illusion of scarcity, and he was prepared to do whatever was necessary to maintain it. He stockpiled diamonds when demand fell to keep prices from collapsing. He restricted production. He crushed independent producers who tried to sell outside the cartel. And during the Second World War, he found himself in the position of controlling a resource that the world's most powerful nation desperately needed, and he managed that position according to the commercial logic that had always governed his company, rather than according to the strategic needs of the Allied war effort. The bulk of the world's industrial diamonds, as distinct from gem diamonds, came from the Belgian Congo. The Congo deposits, mined primarily by a company called Fourminière, produced enormous quantities of small, low-quality diamonds that were nearly worthless as gemstones, but ideal for industrial use. By the end of the interwar period, the Belgian Congo firms within the De Beers cartel were the largest producers of industrial diamonds in the world. Demand for industrial diamonds had stagnated during the Depression years of the 1930s, when global manufacturing was depressed and the appetite for precision machine tools was correspondingly low. The cartel had accumulated stockpiles of industrial diamonds that it released slowly to maintain prices. When the war began, the situation reversed. Demand for industrial diamonds exploded as the belligerent nations expanded their war production. The United States, gearing up for war even before Pearl Harbor, became the largest single consumer. The De Beers cartel, which controlled the Congo production through its marketing arrangements, found itself in a position to supply this demand at prices and terms of its own choosing. It shifted some of its production emphasis toward industrial diamonds to support the Allied war effort, and it profited enormously. De Beers' revenue grew substantially in the early 1940s. The cartel was supplying a wartime necessity, and it was charging wartime prices. And it was doing so from a position of monopoly control that left its customers, including the United States government, with very little bargaining power. The central concern of American war planners was not the price of diamonds, although the price was a grievance. The central concern was security of supply. The industrial diamonds came from the Belgian Congo and South Africa, mostly, and they were marketed through London. The shipping routes from Africa to the United States ran through waters infested with German submarines. The London marketing operation was under German air attack. If the supply were interrupted by submarine warfare, by the loss of the African mines, by the destruction of the London selling operation, by any of a dozen contingencies that wartime made plausible, the United States would run out of industrial diamonds within months, and American precision manufacturing would grind to a halt. The solution, obvious to every American planner who looked at the problem, was to build a strategic stockpile of industrial diamonds inside the United States, large enough to sustain American manufacturing for a year or more in the event that the supply was cut off. The United States government repeatedly requested that De Beers establish such a stockpile on American soil. De Beers repeatedly declined. The cartel was willing to sell the United States the diamonds it needed for current consumption at the cartel's prices, but it was not willing to allow a large reserve of diamonds to accumulate inside the United States, beyond the cartel's control. The reason was commercial. A large American stockpile of industrial diamonds was, from De Beers' perspective, a threat. If the war ended and the stockpile remained, it could be released onto the market, depressing prices and undermining the scarcity on which the entire diamond business depended. Worse, a stockpile inside the United States, beyond the reach of the cartel's control, might tempt the Americans to investigate the true abundance of diamonds, to develop synthetic alternatives, or to break the cartel's monopoly entirely. Oppenheimer would not permit it. He offered, instead, to maintain a stockpile in Canada under De Beers' control that the United States could draw upon only under specific conditions, only when American domestic stocks fell below 90% of their level on a particular date in 1942. The arrangement kept the diamonds under cartel control. It did not give the United States the secure sovereign reserve it wanted. American officials grew increasingly suspicious of De Beers' conduct as the war went on. There were several grounds for suspicion. The first was the stockpile refusal itself, which appeared to subordinate the Allied war effort to the cartel's commercial interests. The second was the allegation made by the United States Board of Trade and later by the Department of Justice that De Beers had used its wartime monopoly position to increase prices while simultaneously diminishing the quality of the diamonds it supplied to the United States. The United States was the largest purchaser of diamonds in the world, and it found the terms offered by the cartel unacceptable in the context of a war economy. The third, and most serious, was the suspicion that the cartel's control of the diamond supply might be benefiting the enemy. Throughout the war, Allied governments were deeply concerned about the ways in which international cartels might be supporting the German war economy. Industrial diamonds were as essential to German precision manufacturing as they were to American precision manufacturing. If the cartel was supplying both sides, or if diamonds were leaking from cartel-controlled sources to Germany through neutral intermediaries, then the cartel's monopoly was not merely a commercial inconvenience to the United States, it was a potential strategic threat. The question of diamond smuggling to Germany was real and was investigated. Germany had no domestic diamond source and depended, like everyone else, on the diamonds that the cartel controlled. German precision manufacturing, the production of machine tools, optical equipment, and precision instruments, required industrial diamonds. Where did Germany get them? Some came from pre-war stockpiles. Some came, the Allies suspected, through smuggling networks operating through neutral countries, particularly through the diamond-cutting center of Antwerp before the German occupation and through various neutral intermediaries afterward. The extent of wartime diamond smuggling to Germany has never been fully established, and the cartel's records on the subject are incomplete and self-serving. But the suspicion was serious enough that it shaped American attitudes toward De Beers throughout the war, and it contributed to the eventual decision to bring legal action against the cartel. While De Beers was declining to build the American stockpile and allegedly manipulating prices and quality, it was simultaneously running one of the most successful advertising campaigns in American history. The campaign had two purposes. The first was to sell gem diamonds to American consumers, building the cultural association between diamonds and romantic commitment that would, by the post-war period, make the diamond engagement ring a near-universal American custom. The famous slogan, "A diamond is forever," was created by the N.W. Ayer advertising agency working for De Beers in 1947, but the campaign that produced it had begun during the war years. The second purpose was to associate diamonds with patriotism and the war effort. In a company memo dated January 26, 1942, just over a month after Pearl Harbor, De Beers copywriters were encouraged to include some mention of industrial diamonds in the new advertising for gem diamonds, on the grounds that industrial diamonds would not have been available in the quantities being received during the war were it not for the gem diamond operations. The argument was a marketing fiction. The supply of industrial diamonds was not, in fact, dependent on the gem diamond business. There was no global shortage of industrial diamonds. The supplies of both gem and industrial diamonds were, in reality, abundant, held in cartel stockpiles and released at controlled rates to maintain prices. But the Fighting Diamonds advertising campaign told American consumers that buying an engagement ring was, in some sense, supporting the war effort, because the same mining operations that produced gems also produced the industrial diamonds that were winning the war. The campaign was extremely successful. De Beers spent approximately $500,000 per year on advertising during the early 1940s, and its revenue grew substantially. The cartel was simultaneously profiting from the war, refusing to build the stockpile the war needed, allegedly manipulating prices, and advertising itself as a patriotic contributor to victory.
Faced with a foreign cartel that would not build the stockpile it needed, the United States pursued every available alternative. The first approach was simple accumulation. American industrial users were encouraged to build up their own working inventories of industrial diamonds, drawing from current cartel supplies so that a larger total quantity would be present inside the United States at any given moment. This helped at the margin, but did not create a true strategic reserve. The second approach was conservation. American industry developed techniques for using diamonds more efficiently, for recovering and reusing worn diamond tools, for crushing larger stones into smaller usable fragments, and for substituting other abrasives wherever the application permitted. Diamond was conserved wherever it could be conserved. The third approach was recovery and recycling, the collection of used and worn industrial diamonds for reprocessing into usable form. None of these approaches solved the fundamental problem, which was that the United States produced no diamonds and depended entirely on cartel-controlled foreign supply. The fourth approach, the one that would eventually transform the entire industry, was synthesis. If diamonds could not be reliably obtained from foreign cartels, perhaps they could be manufactured. The idea of synthetic diamond had a long and frustrating history. Diamond is simply carbon, arranged in a particular crystal structure under conditions of extreme heat and pressure. In principle, if those conditions could be reproduced industrially, diamonds could be manufactured from cheap, abundant carbon. The problem was that the conditions required were extraordinary. Pressures of tens of thousands of atmospheres and temperatures of thousands of degrees, conditions that no industrial process of the 1940s could reliably produce or contain. Numerous chemists and physicists had claimed to have synthesized diamond over the previous century, but none of the claims had been reproducible. The synthesis of diamond remained, throughout the Second World War, an unsolved problem.
The wartime diamond crisis gave the synthetic diamond problem a strategic urgency it had never had before. If the United States could manufacture industrial diamonds, it would break its dependence on the De Beers cartel forever. The problem attracted the attention of American industrial research laboratories, particularly the General Electric Research Laboratory in Schenectady, New York, which had a long history of solving difficult materials problems. General Electric had, over the preceding decades, developed tungsten filaments for light bulbs, tungsten carbide cutting tools, and numerous other advanced materials. The diamond synthesis problem was exactly the kind of difficult, high-value materials challenge at which the GE laboratory excelled. The wartime work did not succeed. The pressures and temperatures required for diamond synthesis were beyond the reach of the equipment available during the war years. But the wartime crisis planted the seed. After the war, General Electric mounted a sustained, well-funded research program to synthesize diamond, building on the experience of wartime materials research and motivated by the same strategic concern that had driven the wartime effort, the desire to break American dependence on the foreign diamond cartel. In December of 1954, a General Electric research team led by Tracy Hall finally succeeded in synthesizing industrial diamond under controlled, reproducible conditions using a high-pressure apparatus of Hall's own design that could generate the necessary combination of heat and pressure. The achievement, announced in 1955, was one of the most significant materials science breakthroughs of the 20th century. It freed American industry and eventually world industry from dependence on natural diamond and on the De Beers cartel for industrial diamond supply. By the 1970s, the majority of industrial diamonds used worldwide were synthetic, manufactured in factories rather than dug from mines, more uniform in hardness and shape than natural diamonds, and therefore superior for many industrial applications. The wartime crisis that De Beers had exploited had, in the long run, motivated the research that would eventually destroy the cartel's most important market.
The American grievances against De Beers came to a head in 1945 when the United States Department of Justice filed an antitrust lawsuit against the De Beers cartel and a number of its constituent member companies in the federal court for the Southern District of New York. The lawsuit, United States of America v. De Beers Consolidated Mines Limited et al., charged the cartel with violations of the Sherman Antitrust Act, the foundational American antitrust statute that prohibited combinations in restraint of trade. The central issue, as the Board of Trade and the Justice Department framed it, was the cartel's conduct regarding the American industrial diamond supply during the war, including the refusal to build a strategic stockpile inside the United States, the alleged price manipulation, and the alleged degradation of the quality of diamonds supplied to American users. The lawsuit faced a fundamental obstacle, which was jurisdiction. The De Beers cartel was completely foreign-controlled and operated entirely outside the United States. It had no business presence on American soil. It owned no American assets that an American court could seize. Its executives were not American citizens and were not present in the United States. The Sherman Act, however broad its reach, could only be enforced against parties over which an American court had jurisdiction, and De Beers had carefully structured itself to remain beyond that jurisdiction. The cartel's deliberate absence from the United States, which had always been a feature of its commercial strategy, now served as a defense against American antitrust enforcement. The case dragged on for 3 years. De Beers' defense argued that the cartel had cooperated with the United States during the war, that the Canadian stockpile had been accessible to the United States under the mutual agreement, and that the supply of industrial diamonds to American industry had never actually been interrupted. The defense pointed out, accurately, that American manufacturing had never actually run out of industrial diamonds during the war. The crisis had been a crisis of insecurity rather than a crisis of actual shortage. The diamonds had always, in the end, been available. C.B. Slauson, a University of Michigan geologist whose expertise the cartel solicited, testified that the industrial diamond stocks in Canada and the United States during the war had been sufficient, and that not all the diamonds in the American stockpile had even been crushed for industrial use. The case was ultimately dismissed on May 5, 1948. The court found that it lacked jurisdiction over the foreign cartel and that the government had not established the violations it alleged in a manner that an American court could remedy. De Beers had won. The cartel's careful structuring, its complete operation outside American legal jurisdiction, had protected it from the consequences of its wartime conduct.
The dismissal of the antitrust case and the fact that American manufacturing never actually ran out of industrial diamonds raises a question. Was the diamond crisis of 1942 real, or was it a phantom, a panic over a shortage that never materialized?
The answer is that the crisis was real, but it was a crisis of strategic vulnerability rather than a crisis of physical shortage. The diamonds were available throughout the war. The cartel sold them to the United States. American manufacturing got what it needed, but it got what it needed on the cartel's terms, at the cartel's prices, and subject to the cartel's continued willingness to supply. The United States, the most powerful nation on earth, was dependent for a critical war material on the goodwill of a foreign commercial monopoly that it could not control, could not compel, and could not, as the failed antitrust suit demonstrated, even successfully sue. This dependency was the crisis. It was the kind of strategic vulnerability that war planners are paid to lose sleep over. If the war had gone differently, if the German submarine campaign had been more successful in cutting the Atlantic supply routes, if the African mines had been lost, if the cartel had decided for its own reasons to restrict supply, American precision manufacturing would have faced a genuine shortage with no domestic fallback. The United States had built the most powerful war economy in history on a foundation that included a critical material it could not produce and a supplier it could not control. The fact that the vulnerability was never fully exploited does not mean it was not real. It means the United States was fortunate and that it learned a lesson it would not forget. The post-war drive to synthesize diamond and the broader post-war program of strategic materials stockpiling that the United States adopted were direct responses to the vulnerabilities that the diamond crisis and similar crises had revealed. The industrial diamond crisis was not unique. It was one instance of a broader pattern that ran throughout the American war economy. The United States, for all its industrial might, was dependent on foreign sources for a long list of strategic materials. Natural rubber came from Southeast Asia, which the Japanese conquered in 1942, triggering the Crash program to develop synthetic rubber. Tin came from the same region, triggering the program to reduce tin consumption in everything from food cans to bearing alloys. Tungsten, chromium, manganese, and a dozen other strategic metals came from foreign mines that were vulnerable to interdiction. Quartz crystals for radio frequency control came from Brazil. Quinine for malaria treatment came from Southeast Asian cinchona plantations that the Japanese also captured. In each case, the United States faced the same fundamental problem. Its industrial power rested on a material it could not produce domestically, and it had to scramble to secure the supply, develop substitutes, or both. The industrial diamond crisis was distinctive in one respect. In most of the strategic materials crises, the obstacle was geography or enemy action. The rubber was in Japanese-held territory. The quartz was across a submarine-infested ocean. But in the diamond case, the obstacle was a commercial cartel that was nominally allied with the United States, that operated from the territory of a friendly nation, and that withheld full cooperation not out of enmity but out of commercial self-interest. The diamond crisis revealed that an ally's commercial interests could be as much of an obstacle to American war production as an enemy's military action. It was a more uncomfortable lesson than the rubber crisis or the tin crisis because it could not be blamed on the enemy. It had to be blamed, if it was blamed on anyone, on the workings of international capitalism itself, on the logic of monopoly, on the structures of global commerce that did not bend to the needs of a nation at war. While the diamond cartel negotiations played out in Washington and London, the actual diamonds were being consumed every day in thousands of American machine shops by hundreds of thousands of workers who never thought about where the diamonds came from. The tool room diamond issued from the crib, dressed the grinding wheel, and was logged back in. The diamond die in the wire drawing shop pulled mile after mile of uniform wire. The diamond-tipped tool trued the bearing race. These were consumables, treated like any other tooling, their strategic significance invisible to the men who used them. The machine tool workers of the American war economy were, in their way, as essential as the soldiers at the front, and even less recognized. They were the tool makers, the grinders, the machinists, the men and increasingly the women who turned raw forgings and castings into precision components of aircraft engines and gun mechanisms and naval machinery. The historian Francis Walton called the toolmakers the master builders of the machine age, and the description was accurate. They could transform a 200-pound lump of metal into a 75-pound propeller shaft, precisely turned and finished, one of 17,000 parts in an air-cooled aircraft engine, and a relatively simple part at that. Every one of those operations, somewhere in its sequence, depended on diamond. The workers did not know that the diamonds in their toolroom cribs had been the subject of an international struggle between their government and a foreign cartel. They simply used them, conserved them when told to conserve them, and turned out the precision parts that the war demanded. They were the final point of consumption for a supply chain that reached back through the cartel's marketing organization in London to the mines of the Belgian Congo and South Africa, and they were entirely unaware of any of it.
The dismissal of the antitrust case in 1948 did not end the American conflict with the diamond cartel. The Justice Department continued to pursue De Beers in various legal actions over the following decades, and the cartel continued to structure itself carefully to remain beyond the reach of American law. For most of the second half of the 20th century, De Beers executives could not safely set foot in the United States for fear of antitrust prosecution, and the company conducted its American business through intermediaries. The cartel's monopoly persisted, but its foundation was eroding. The General Electric synthetic diamond breakthrough of 1954 progressively removed the industrial diamond market from the cartel's control. By the late 20th century, synthetic industrial diamonds dominated the market that natural diamonds had once monopolized, and the strategic vulnerability that had so worried American war planners in 1942 had been permanently eliminated by American materials science. The gem diamond business, by contrast, remained under cartel control much longer, sustained by the very advertising campaign that De Beers had intensified during the war years. "A diamond is forever," the slogan created in 1947, became one of the most successful advertising campaigns in history, embedding the diamond engagement ring in American and eventually global culture as a near-universal custom. The cartel that had refused to build a strategic diamond stockpile for the American war effort went on to build instead a cultural institution that generated profits for the rest of the century. The diamonds that had been fought over in 1942 as a strategic war material became, in the post-war imagination, symbols of romance, their industrial significance forgotten, their wartime drama erased from public memory.
The General Electric synthetic diamond program deserves a closer look because it represents the eventual American answer to the diamond crisis, and because it follows the same pattern as so many other American responses to wartime material shortages. The pattern was always the same. Faced with dependence on a foreign source of a critical material, American industry mounted a research program to synthesize a substitute, and American materials science eventually succeeded, freeing the country from the dependence and often producing a superior product in the process. Synthetic rubber, synthetic quartz crystals, synthetic quinine substitutes, and synthetic diamond all followed this pattern. The diamond synthesis was the most technically difficult of these challenges, requiring pressures and temperatures at the extreme limits of what industrial equipment could produce, and it took nearly a decade after the war to achieve. But when it was achieved, it was decisive. Tracy Hall, the GE chemist who led the successful synthesis in December of 1954, used a high-pressure apparatus he called the belt, which could generate pressures exceeding 100,000 atmospheres and temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Celsius, the conditions under which carbon transforms into diamond. Hall received almost no personal reward for his achievement. General Electric gave him a savings bond worth $10. He left the company shortly afterward, frustrated by the lack of recognition, and joined the faculty of Brigham Young University, where he continued his high-pressure research. The achievement that freed American industry from the diamond cartel earned its inventor a $10 savings bond.
The pattern of the unrecognized contributor, which runs through so many of these industrial stories, held true even for the man who solved the diamond problem permanently.
The lesson of the industrial diamond crisis is a lesson about the relationship between industrial power and strategic vulnerability. The United States in 1942 was the most powerful industrial nation in history, and yet it found itself dependent at the foundation of its entire precision manufacturing economy on a material it could not produce and a supplier it could not control. The dependency did not bring the war economy down because the supply held and the cartel, for all its commercial maneuvering, did not actually cut the United States off. But the vulnerability was real, and it taught American planners a lesson that shaped American policy for the rest of the century. The lesson was that industrial power is not the same as strategic independence, that the most powerful economy on Earth can still be held hostage by control of a single critical input, and that the only permanent solution to such a dependency is to develop the domestic capacity through synthesis or substitution to produce the critical material at home. The United States learned this lesson and acted on it. The post-war strategic materials stockpiling program, the sustained investment in synthetic materials research, the careful attention to supply chain security for critical inputs, all of these grew out of the wartime experience of vulnerability that the diamond crisis exemplified. The country that had been held hostage by the diamond cartel in 1942 set out to ensure that it would never be held hostage again by anyone for any material. It largely succeeded. The synthetic diamond industry that GE created broke the cartel's hold on industrial diamonds permanently. The broader program of materials independence reduced American vulnerability across the entire range of strategic inputs. The diamond crisis, uncomfortable and nearly forgotten, was one of the experiences that taught the United States to think systematically about the materials foundation of its industrial power.
In a war decided by what could be built depended at the very bottom on the hardest substance on Earth. Every precision part in every American weapon, every crankshaft and bearing race and wire die and gun component passed at some point through a manufacturing operation that required diamond. The diamond dressed the grinding wheel, trued the bearing, drew the wire, tested the alloy. Without it, the precision economy could not function, and the precision economy was the foundation on which all other war production rested. And the diamond came from foreign mines, controlled by a foreign cartel, channeled through a foreign marketing organization, beyond the reach of American law and American compulsion. The cartel understood its power and used it. It declined to build the stockpile the war effort needed. It allegedly raised prices and lowered quality. It profited enormously while advertising itself as a patriotic contributor to victory. And when the United States finally took it to court, the cartel's careful structuring beyond American jurisdiction protected it, and the case was dismissed. The most powerful nation on Earth could not compel a commercial monopoly to do what the war required, because the monopoly held something the nation could not produce and could not do without. It was the kind of vulnerability that does not appear in the heroic narratives of the war, because it has no battle, no hero, no clean resolution. It has only a cartel, a dependency, a lawsuit that failed, and a long, slow American effort to ensure that such a dependency would never threaten the country again. That effort succeeded in the end in a General Electric laboratory in 1954, when an underpaid chemist named Tracy Hall finally forced carbon to become diamond under 100,000 atmospheres of pressure and received a $10 savings bond for breaking a monopoly that had held the world's industrial diamonds hostage for 60 years. The synthetic diamond he made was harder, purer, and more uniform than anything the cartel had ever dug out of the ground. It was made in America, from American carbon, by American science, and it freed American industry forever from the foreign cartel that had refused in 1942 to sell the United States the diamonds it needed on any terms but its own. In a war fought between industries, the deepest vulnerability was not a weapon the enemy held, it was a material an ally controlled. The Americans never forgot it.
They built the synthetic diamond, they built the stockpiles, they built the materials independence that ensured no cartel would ever again hold the foundation of American manufacturing hostage. The diamonds had won their commercial battle in 1948 in the dismissal of the antitrust case. The Americans won the longer war in the laboratory 6 years later. The cartel kept the engagement rings, the Americans took the industrial diamond, and with it, the future. In a war decided by what could be built, the nation that learned to build its own diamonds was the nation that ensured it could always build everything else. That was the lesson. It was learned the hard way in 1942 when every American weapon needed diamonds and one cartel refused to sell them on any terms but its own.